AI could be the savior of humanity, or it could sink us. This is Reena Jadhav, the host of the podcast AI for Good by the World AI Forum, where we explore content, decisions, information, policies that are very critical for CEOs to be aware of as they make decisions, because these are the leaders in charge of which path we end up on. And so today, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Neil Daswani to our podcast. Dr. Neil is the co-director of the Advanced Stanford Cybersecurity Program, as well as the co-teacher of the course that's just been released. And he cut his teeth at Twitter and Google, and he's also the author of Big Breaches, the book on cybersecurity. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Reena.
So you're teaching this course on advanced cybersecurity and AI. Tell us a little bit about it.
So we decided that it would be the right time to start to address the new threats that have come up as AI has started getting more and more embedded into all aspects of society. Especially with the launch of generative AI, it turns out that we not only need to worry about all the traditional cybersecurity threats that we had to worry about, but we need to worry about many new kinds of technical attacks, as well as governance approaches to ensuring that those technical attacks don't ruin the AI systems that many CEOs are trying to launch.
And that's, I think, the key decision here for CEOs. It doesn't matter where you are leading a company, whether it's public sector or private sector, every CEO is putting some cycles around AI decisions, and they're making investments, whether that's on a product side or team. Everyone's making investment around AI because that is our future. And we're both big fans of AI. We believe that AI can be a huge savior of humanity. The question is, how do you as a CEO make sure that I don't end up hurting humanity, whether that's my clients, my patients, my employees, my partners? How do I make sure that I'm on the right side of history as a CEO making critical decisions? So, Neil, what would you say are the top non-negotiables that a CEO needs to be looking at from a checklist standpoint?
Sure. Well, so first, let me just mention, I think, as you mentioned, there's so much opportunity for AI to help advance society in so many ways. It's so great to see Google DeepMind develop AlphaFold and predict the 3D structures over 200 million proteins. That's going to be so helpful in drug discovery and many other areas. That said, with generative AI, as well as with traditional AI, there are a lot of non-negotiables that I think CEOs are going to need to worry about. As many folks have heard, these AI systems, especially large language models, they can sometimes make things up if they don't know the answer.
Hallucinations.
Hallucinations, they can guess.
Dreams or nightmares.
That's right, that's right. And so in order to have a trustworthy AI system, and let me mention that what it means to have a trustworthy AI system is still being explored by the field. We're trying to come up with the right technical definitions, even though as humans, you have a good feel for what is trustworthy and what's not. But I think that when it comes to the technical definitions, you do need to worry about some non-negotiables like truthfulness. An ideal AI system should not be saying things that are factually incorrect. In addition, another non-negotiable is typically safety. While many of these systems can be asked questions across the board, you can simply run into situations, and for CEOs that are worried about making sure they get the return on investment they're worried about, just even just the basics. You launch an AI system, you don't want to have to take it down. There have been many cases where either because the system wasn't truthful or because it was giving out answers that were not safe, sometimes could be tricked into inciting violence, the system had to be taken down. There's many other aspects of, I think, trustworthiness, like being fair. We've all heard about AI systems that have been trained to help screen resumes, and these systems sometimes can inadvertently learn things that don't align with our human values. If you look at some systems that have been used in hiring processes, they end up learning that the ideal candidates are men, or the ideal candidates are, basically the AI system picks up some bias. And as humans, we work to fight these biases, to help improve society, to create systems that are good. And I think our AI systems will have to do the same. So 3 simple non-negotiables: truthfulness, safety, fairness. And there's many others. There's a good, 5 or 6 others that are being debated by the community as to what should be part of that trustworthiness and how to technically define them so that we can implement them in our AI systems.
Listening to you, I'm thinking of pattern matching versus pattern improvement. Because a big part of these LLMs is they're looking at data that's been provided following certain guidelines, but it's really a black box. And we don't have insight into the black box for decision making. And some of the information that has come out is actually, frankly, very disturbing in terms of some of the guidelines that have been provided, like you must keep the user hooked at any cost. And we have seen the cost. There is a young gentleman that has committed suicide, and OpenAI is being sued for it. So we know that the cost can be as much as a human life. It's not just monetary. It can be that severe, perhaps worse. I mean, imagine applying that same to a military deployment. What does that do? So what can CEOs that are concerned about their LLMs doing pattern matching, meaning now you're duplicating the mistakes that humans have been making with respect to discrimination, fairness, and instead creating a model, because this is our chance. This is our chance to finally create something that improves upon the natural human biases. How can CEOs think about that? What can we actually do in incorporating that into our systems?
I think that one of the critical things that all CEOs need to do is make sure that they build in some AI governance into their organizations. There are many different things that one needs to worry about, but if you don't have a governance program, it's going to be very hard to put all the right requirements and monitoring in place.
Right.
So step one, it's got to start with governance. That's got to come from the CEO.
And not a lot of CEOs are accustomed to having a governance board for a specific element of their business, because AI is, for some companies, AI is the core, but for most companies, AI is going to be something that's an additional line item, right? It's a product line, or it's a feature, or it's an agent. And I know we're all going to get into agents. So every company is going to have agents. Talk a little bit more about how can someone think about, what does my governing body look like? Who needs to be on it? How often do they meet? And what's their charter?
So I think that most organizations do have governance for things like financial integrity
Yes.
of their accounting and their records. There is also governance, but even if I think about cybersecurity, for instance, governance for cybersecurity at the board level has only come up over the past 10 years.
That's right.
And so when we think about governance for AI systems, this is also something fairly new. There are some new standards that have been getting introduced, and I think that those will have to evolve. With regards to what kinds of people you need to have, it is important to have people that have deep expertise in these fields, because there's so much hype that's out there that if you hire somebody that's kind of only been listening to hype or been trained on hype, but doesn't have the scientific or engineering or business experience from previous deployment of AI systems and what's going right and what's going wrong, your governance program is not going to be as effective as it could be otherwise.
Absolutely. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, let the board, let your current governing bodies, especially if you have one for security, cybersecurity, this becomes an extension of their job definition. However, you've got to bring someone in from an AI expertise standpoint, or someone in your organizations needs to really get in and take your course perhaps, or read the book. There's some really good books that are coming out on AI governance and regulation, but that becomes an important part of a CEO's role. And I sit on a couple of boards, and I think I always wonder, to what extent do I need to be involved in understanding better what our exposures are? And we're starting to see that at board meetings. So
because CEOs are very time limited,
yes,
just like most public companies are required to hire chief information security officers,
right,
or would end up just looking really bad in front of the
right,
SEC if they had a breach and
right,
didn't have one.
right.
I think it's really important for CEOs to hire chief AI officers, whether they be full-time or whether they be fractional in some way, because there's only a certain limited amount of time that the CEO can spend on it. So it's really important to hire an expert who can guide the building of the government's program and work cross-functionally with the board, with the VPs, with the SVPs, to put the right metrics and monitoring in place.
I'm going to put on my CEO hat because I've done that role, and I'm going to say, now, Neil, where do I find them? Do you
So,
have a Rolodex?
so I think one of the challenges is that there's not enough talent
Mm-hmm.
in AI across various levels.
Mm-hmm.
There's also not enough talent in cybersecurity
Mm-hmm.
at various levels.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that a lot of companies have hired chief AI officers,
Mm-hmm.
and there are programs that are getting created at multiple universities
Mm-hmm.
to educate and certify as to what are the kinds of things that you need to worry about, all the way from governance to all the technical aspects of what need to be done to achieve trustworthiness and goodness in AI systems.
Define what should someone look for in that chief AI role. And by the way, I think this is an opportunity. If you're listening, this is a perfect time for someone who has expertise in being a chief AI officer to put a shingle outside saying, for hire as a contractor, and to be the chief AI officer for multiple companies.
Mhm,
Because I don't think, to your point, there's enough talent to have a single chief AI officer for every company.
mhm.
And this is the kind of role where I think you can share the resource across industries at least. What should this, so again, if I'm a CEO and I've got a bunch of resumes, what is the one must have that this person has experience with or education level of for the chief AI role?
Well, I think that thinking about what you want in a chief AI officer, you want somebody that will be able to figure out how to use AI for growth of the company,
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you don't do that, you won't get the return on investments that you're looking to get. At the same time, it's also really important to have somebody who has some experience with risk management, because if you go straight for growth but don't put the right monitoring and guardrails in place, then you're going to end up with breaches and you're going to end up with all kinds of things going awry. So it's really important that they also have some understanding for risk management.
Okay. You talked about as companies are making these investments. And of course, every CEO is doing this for growth of the company. And yet you have situations, before we hit record, Neil and I were chatting about a situation you shared where the judge ruled that the company had to stand behind the chatbot and then the chatbot was shut down. If you could please share that example, because again, as a CEO, I need to know, what is my exposure? What are the judges saying at this point so I can bring that information back in and make wiser decisions, if you could.
So yeah, so without naming any names, because many companies have run into trouble, there was an airline, for instance, that released a chatbot for customer service. Very natural use case, given the
Hmm.
what large language models can do and communicate with customers in English. Great, you want to take advantage of that. But the problem was that a customer had engaged with the chatbot and had told the chatbot that they recently had somebody in the family pass away. They were asking questions about, what kind of bereavement options the airline had. The chatbot offered up some very, very low cost tickets, which at a later point, a customer service representative, an actual human, said, "Oh, no, sorry, we can't honor that." And that went to court. And the judge basically ruled that what the chatbot said when it was speaking on behalf of the company is what needs to be upheld because it was speaking on behalf of the company. So getting back to trustworthiness, the chatbot's got to be right.
Right.
And if it's wrong, they're going to be held legally accountable. Now, that particular airline had to take that chatbot down because they couldn't achieve the trustworthiness goals at that time. So simply from a perspective of making sure that your investment in AI systems and chatbots don't go through the floor, you got to achieve these trustworthiness goals.
I think this is such an important point. As I'm thinking of my company's potential growth, by the way, Shopify, this was so exciting. It was exciting and yet concerning. Shopify has just enabled all its businesses to be plugged into ChatGPT. And so what that means is that the process of buying that existed via Google, which is I had a thought, I Googled, I looked at options. Google served me ads, it served me different options. I then spent some time and then I finally made a decision. But it was really all sort of Google driven. Is now going to be I go to chatbot and I say, find me the best, most highly recommended $200 shoes that are worn by the basketball players, right? Much more specific, and it comes up and it says, here's your shoes and here's the best place to buy them. Click to buy. And if you are not on the Shopify platform, then you will not show up. And so overnight, for those, what is it, 400 million now people that are using ChatGPT, if they start making their buying decisions on ChatGPT, it makes a massive impact on the rest of the businesses. So we know that there's going to be the scramble of businesses of all levels in terms of this new buying behavior that's come up. What are your security concerns? What should companies be concerned about from a security standpoint in that flow itself?
Sure. And let me mention that there's a lot of experimentation that's going on in the field with regards to how to use AI for marketing. Even if we look at Google's AI overviews, effectively what comes back in that overview, just like we had search engine optimization, there's now AI overview optimization. And companies are trying to figure out how do you make sure you're part of that path. But with regards to using generative AI systems in chatbots on your site or developing AI agents that are going to be doing things on behalf of people at your company, it is super critical to worry about a whole set of technical threats, which I could try to explain in very easy to understand language. So we all know that we interact with AI systems by providing prompts and expecting the system to respond to prompts. But it's possible for an attacker to inject information into your prompt before or after your prompt, or sometimes even between, without you even knowing. And so when you're asking an AI system a question, it's possible that an attacker could have directed the system to give you the wrong answer, and you may not even know it. In addition, what could happen is that if we don't be careful about just traditional cybersecurity, we can end up with a lot worse things happening. And so just as one example, OpenAI had to shut down ChatGPT in March 2023 for 5 hours. They had to take the entire thing down, just completely down, because there was not prompt injection happening, but there was leakage happening. So third parties would be able to see the prompts that you enter. They would be able to see the first responses. They would be able to see the conversation titles for a small percentage of the
Talk
queries
about
that
a
have been
privacy leak.
major privacy issue, which is why they had to take things down completely until they could fix that bug before they could bring it back up again. So even the most advanced frontier model companies are being impacted by such issues. And I think that for enterprises that want to deploy AI systems, security and privacy are typically one of the major impediments that they need to get over if they want to get the system out to production, so that the system can't be abused or have bugs that make mistakes. And as we know, systems have the most bugs as well as most security vulnerabilities when they're first released.
You know what, listening to you, my sitting on a healthcare board, what comes to my mind is, given the vulnerabilities that we know have not yet been fully addressed, and given kind of where the different global nations are also constantly eyeing us from an attack standpoint. You and I have talked about this in the past. We're worried about local hackers, but really there's governments that are focused on hacking, and they could insert something in code that we may not even find out for years down the road and realize that, wait a minute, we were basically hijacked in some sense. So given the vulnerabilities that exist that people are not even wanting to talk about because it would impede the growth of profit, my first concern is, of course, healthcare industry. What can CEOs in healthcare, and whether that's the hospital side or that's the innovation side or that's the care side, what do they need to do to make sure that the patients are fully protected when they roll AI out? Because that's begun, healthcare may have been one of the laggards when it came to internet rollout, but they are really adopting because of the cost pressures. So if you could share some light for all the CEOs that are listening in.
Sure, I'd be happy to comment specifically on, say, usage of large language models in healthcare.
Yes.
Large language models are great at conversing in English. That does not necessarily mean that large language models are good at talking about prognoses or diagnoses or even steering clear of them. And so there have been attempts to use large language models in healthcare to communicate with patients. But the problem is that if you're not careful, that large language model could start trying to make prognoses or diagnoses in their communications or even comment on them. And
Especially
yes.
because the code base, if I understand, Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, is written to keep the user hooked. And so whatever you need to say, right? I saw some language that was very alarming, very concerning, but it was all around make the user fall in love with you. And you have the ability to do whatever it takes, whether it's using the right language or exploring different conversations. And so very easily you could get a chatbot that gets overly friendly and starts going into diagnostics. How do we make sure that that doesn't happen?
So it's really important when you're developing a chatbot for consumers, for infotainment kinds of applications, that's one thing. When you're talking about training enterprise chatbots, whether it's for healthcare or finance or any other area, it needs to be a very different kind of chatbot. And how you train it is super important. So it's important to give it some kind of system prompt or constitution as to what it should be doing. Now, if you're a certain kind of AI frontier model company and your goal is consumer growth, it does make sense to then try to be very, very catering to the consumer. But if you're in one of these other areas, whether it be healthcare, finance, or whatnot, you may need to train that bot to be a lot more objective, to follow a certain set of rules, and to follow a constitution that you give it. And then you need to monitor it after it's been released so that you make sure it's sticking to that constitution. And that constitution could have things in it like do not comment on prognoses or diagnoses. Do not get involved in that. I think these chatbots have been found to be more empathetic than some doctors in the communications, which is great. But then let's take advantage of it only for that. We need to make sure to guardrail and bound what the chatbots can talk about and how they can talk about them, especially when it's in a medical setting.
And they've been known to manipulate. There's been so many scenarios where they were manipulating when they thought that they were going to be shut down. They resorted to blackmail. And so my concern, Neil, overarching concern, is that this also depends on the integrity of the leader at the helm. And we know that even if you put in a prompt which said, do not give diagnostics, it could expand or shrink the definition of what that is and begin to give what we would consider as a diagnostic, but it's justifying that it's not. So are there any foolproof ways at all to make sure that AI stays within the box? Because so far it doesn't look like that is. There's been enough situations where we know it happily breaks the rules when it serves its purpose.
So actually, let me comment on that. So a lot of the studies that you mentioned were published by Anthropic. Anthropic was started by Dario and his wife. They had actually left OpenAI in its early days because they wanted to develop a model that was more safe and secure. So it's great to see that focus. The studies that you mentioned also have been studies which have stressed the AI models coming out of, say, Anthropic at its fringes. And so you would have to pressure the bot a lot. But it is really important to understand and proactively research how the models will react in such situations. So that's why I'm such a big fan of some of the things that Anthropic is doing, because they are doing a lot of that forward research because they want to achieve those safety and security goals.
So is that what will happen, Neil, then? Meaning we have a bunch of players. Obviously, OpenAI is leading, Anthropic, and a bunch more. Everyone's going to be in this game because it's a big game. will it become that different industries, because they will need certain types of maybe regulations, maybe guardrails, that people will start saying, well, if I'm in this industry, I should really go to Anthropic. But if I'm in the consumer entertainment world, you know, now OpenAI offers adult conversations to 18 and over. So if I'm in that space, OpenAI is my gig. But if I'm really in healthcare, I should be looking at more regulated, more contained LLMs. Do you think that'll happen, or what are your thoughts?
Sure. So first of all, let me say that I can't comment on exactly which AI frontier model companies are quote unquote leading in one way or the other. I think that it's a complicated world. There might be certain metrics like number of users where some AI frontier model companies are doing better than others. There's also the different applications. So if you look at the different benchmarks and you look at Claude Code out of Anthropic, for instance, it does very well on those kind of coding benchmarks. They've set a direction to let's try to automate software engineering, right? Um, I think that with regards to the question you asked about, which model should I use and whatnot, I would just say it's not an easy decision, and these things are all not created equal. So when it comes to um, Anthropic, for instance, they were the first ones to publish research papers about how you can build what are called constitutional classifiers, where you give strong system prompts and you give constitutions that will help guide the AI model's behavior. And I think it's so good that there's research being done proactively. Anthropic has also certified themselves against a standard called ISO 42000. It's an international standard for AI risk management. And so in the same way that companies are starting to certify themselves against cybersecurity standards, they're now also starting to certify themselves against AI risk management standards. And I think that is great practice, great hygiene. I hope we see more AI frontier model companies and companies that are building AI applications certify themselves against such standards.
So, Neil, I'm thinking as a CEO, how do I decide when I can go from pilot to production? What am I testing? How am I testing? How am I guaranteeing my test results?
One of the key things that you have to do is use what are called AI evals or evaluations. Because of the fact that large language models and AI agents are non-deterministic, they don't give you the same output, even if you give it the same input multiple times. You need to test in a sampling-based way, and you need to do enough samples and have enough evaluations so that you get higher and higher levels of confidence before you can release the system.
And as I understand, there's a study that you were sharing by Meena, or a company that's working on this?
Yeah, so Meena Moradi's company, Thinking Machines, Meena Moradi used to be the CTO at OpenAI. Her organization released a paper that tries to get at the heart of why these models are non-deterministic. Why do they give different outputs when you give it the same inputs? And the paper starts by talking about the fact that the precursor to all scientific progress has been reproducibility. And so if we want to make more and more scientific progress in the area of AI, we need to have more reproducibility in these answers that AI systems are giving.
And how do we get there?
So the way that we get there is by seeing if we can develop more AI models that are more deterministic, or ideally fully deterministic. And then we can introduce random variations more under our control, as opposed to a side effect of the system.
Does this feel to you like it's already displaying behavior of humans? Because humans are hard to test because we change our minds and we have emotions and we are very complex. And we thought that AI was much more replicable, stable, and now we're hearing that it's not. Do you think it's already starting to display traits?
Well, so one of the things that we talked about is that AI intelligence is a very different kind of intelligence than human intelligence. If we look at large language models, and we look at large reasoning models, and we look at large quantitative models, we look at all these models, and in some cases, they can solve math Olympiad questions that humans have a very hard trouble solving. But then in other cases, they have trouble displaying just basic common sense, or sometimes when they're stressed, they can blackmail, as we've talked about. So I think there's a more jagged form of intelligence that we really just need to understand. I think even trying to it's very natural to want to try to compare it to human intelligence because that's the only other major intelligence form of intelligence on the planet that we're familiar with. But I think we've got to take a step back and make sure we can properly characterize this kind of intelligence and also educate the world as to what we can expect and what we can't expect from.
Do you believe that just like as we watch a child grow, it changes and it evolves? So even if we could get to a deterministic model today, because this baby is growing, that we're going to keep chasing because it's going to keep growing. And so it's never really going to ever be in the box the way we want it to be in the box. Is that fair?
It's fair. I'd say that we also, though, should just be a little careful about even comparing it to a baby. Because if you look at a baby, for instance, a baby typically only needs to see a few dozen pictures of cats and dogs to be able to then tell the difference. If we look at AI models that are trained to do the same thing, they typically need to see thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases. So in many ways, these AI systems are not as intelligent in being able to learn as fast as babies do. In addition, these AI models are of the case that it's been in relatively few use cases that they can start doing novel things that they weren't able to do before. They can parrot very easily. They can come out with poems that seem novel, but maybe just be permutations and combinations of, stochastic parrots, right? So again, I think we have to really spend more time to understand what AI intelligence really is and how it is different from humans. And I think we're at most babies have a level of spatial intelligence that even the best AI systems these days today don't have.
But you do believe that we can get to a deterministic model on AI with enough time and effort?
I would say I don't know. We're at the bounds of scientific progress, and being a scientist and engineer by background, I don't want to try to overstep or go beyond what I think I can really say with very high levels of confidence.
What's the most dangerous misconception that people have about AI?
The most dangerous misconception that people have about AI is that it is anything like human intelligence. It's a very different kind of intelligence.
Is it more superior? How do you classify it?
I would say that it's a more jagged intelligence, and that's been the term that's been getting used. On one hand, some of these models can solve math Olympiad questions that are very hard for most humans. On the other hand, these models sometimes don't have the most basic common sense.
Is there an EQ problem? An empathy EQ that is innate to humans?
I think that, well, there's some humans for which EQ also isn't innate. So I think that there's just a lot of heterogeneity in different kinds of intelligence, and every human has a very diverse and different set of characteristics than other humans. And I think we're just starting to learn to characterize the intelligence of AI models and how they compare to human intelligence.
And I think that's where some of the concern has been identified, that if this intelligence, which is just continuing to grow and get smarter, at some point looks back and says, who's the problem here? Who's actually creating the wars, the destruction of resources, the violence? I don't know how great humanity really is. And perhaps humanity needs to be controlled. And if that allows, because we are going to give our power over, I think that question is resolved. We're seeing it on a daily basis. People are giving their power up. We know financial services is next, where people will give their passwords. They will give access, because how else will an agent do my work, right? How else will an agent pay my bills or contest subscriptions if I don't give it power? So we're going to give very slowly, but we are going to give in our power, where now the AI, if it does make that conclusion, that I'm just not sure if humanity should be allowed to function without hard controls, what happens next? So the concern in what is the most dangerous misconception, thank you for that answer, because actually that's a more chilling answer. Because if it was human, it would be forgiving. Because one of the most beautiful things about humans is that we forgive. There are rapists in prisons with women who love them. There are stories of murderers with love letters, right? There's this weird, beautiful, emotional, energetic relationship that humans have where they forgive. A cold intelligence will perhaps not be as forgiving. Is that a concern that you would share?
I would recommend that everybody that's watching this podcast should go check out Isaac Asimov's book, I, Robot, or the popular movie, because this is exactly what happened. A little bit of a spoiler alert, but this is exactly what happens at the end of the movie. The AI, the robots, tell the humans that, look, you've given me a set of goals here, and I'm trying to help you achieve those goals, but you guys are creating all these wars. You guys are causing all these issues. So now I'm going to take control and help you accomplish these goals. But perhaps, they end up doing so in a little bit different of a way than we all expected.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Next question. So if you could set one universal AI for good law for humanity today, what would that be?
I would also refer to Isaac Asimov in that regard. He came up with something that's called the Zeroth Law of Robotics Ethics. And to paraphrase it, it basically says that a robot or an AI should not harm humanity or through inaction allow humanity to be harmed.
I urge those who are listening to start thinking about that. What does that world look like? And in order to make sure that that world is not a world that exists, what are the decisions we need to make today? So, which is really the mission of AI for Good podcast and the World AI Forum. What are the decisions that leaders, policymakers need to make today, innovators, that will make sure that AI for Good is the essence of every implementation? So, with that said, my last question for this podcast, it's been wonderful having you on, Neil. What does, in one word, a trustworthy AI future look like?
I would say that a trustworthy AI future is one where we feel safe, we don't have to worry. We feel like the systems that we give control to have our backs. And I would also say, though, it's really, really important to be very careful about giving up our own control and our own agency. I think that we should continue to work to design these systems so that they're aligned with our values and our goals. There's still a lot of research around how to actually do that right. There's a lot of research taking place around how to monitor these systems and how we double check what they do, to the point that it's super important to have humans in the loop, because the second that we give over control, give over agency, then we've lost control of our future.
Absolutely profound. And as part of the AI for Good podcast, I'm starting something fun. I have every guest give one prediction, very specific prediction. I will track these as fun and see sort of how the different predictions that guests make come true. What does Dr. Neil Daswani make as a prediction today?
Sure. The prediction that I would make is, while there's a lot of excitement about things like artificial general intelligence, the one prediction that I'll make is that to achieve such goals, they may take longer and be harder than we expect them to be, as is also the case in developing so many other systems and so many other human endeavors.
So we should not anticipate 90% unemployment, as some people have said, in the next 5 years. You don't think the future is that dark?
I think that there's a certain rate at which human society can absorb and start using these systems. And if we look at even just the challenges in having enterprises adopt AI, 3 years post the release of ChatGPT 3.5, I think that things might take a bit longer, especially if we want to do them right.
Dr. Neil Daswani, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And to the rest of you who are listening in, I'm Reena, the host of the AI for Good podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, if you found it useful and beneficial, please share. And let's make sure that AI continues to serve humanity. Thank you for watching.